You could see it from the highway. A white mountain, sitting on a farm road in eastern Virginia. 40 feet across at the base, and taller than the truck that made it. Bone white in the sun, so bright that on a clear day in July, it hurt to look at. 900 tons of oyster shell. Walt Prine had watched it grow for 9 years. It started as a courtesy. Then it became a habit. Then it became a mountain, sitting square across the farm road that ran to his back 60. So that every trip out to those fields meant going the long way around, through the ditch, 4 extra minutes each way, 4 times a day, for 9 years. The dust was the worst of it. Crushed shell dust is fine and white and alkaline, and when the trucks came in dry weather, it hung in the air and drifted, and it settled on his windshield and his porch rail and the hood of his truck until the whole place looked like it had been dusted with flour. He had asked them to stop. He had asked them 4 times. And the 4th time, the plant manager stood in Walt Prine's own driveway, smiled at him, and said the sentence that would sit in Walt's chest like a stone for the next 6 years. He said, "Walt, it's calcium. It's the most harmless thing in the world." Here is the thing about that sentence. It was true. It was completely, precisely, scientifically true. And it was the answer to every problem Walt Prine had. It was the answer to the failing yields, and the fertilizer bills, and the reason his father's ground had been dying slowly for 30 years. The man who was mocking him told him exactly what was on his road, and why it mattered, standing in his driveway, in the middle of an insult, and Walt Prine did not hear a word of it, because he was too angry to listen. 6 years later, Tidewater shellfish would be paying him $22 a ton to keep doing the thing they had been doing for free. Walt Prine was 57 years old, and he was running out of time. 140 acres of coastal plain outside a town of 900 people. Soybeans, some corn, 18 head of cattle. A house his grandfather put up in 1936. His wife Dorothy died in 2009. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from the diagnosis to the end of it. He had not changed the arrangement of the kitchen since. And his son was in Richmond, 31 years old, working in insurance, and had made it clear, in the gentlest way a son can, that he was not coming back to farm. So the clock on Walt Prine was not a bank clock, it was a body clock. He had maybe 10 more seasons in him, and when he could not do it anymore, 140 acres his family had worked for 4 generations would go to whoever bid on it. That was the thing that woke him at 4 in the morning. And there was one more thing, and it was the thing nobody talked about at the co-op counter. The ground was dying, not dramatically, slowly. His father had pulled 55 bushels an acre off the home field in the 70s. Walt was pulling 38. He was buying more fertilizer every year, to hold a smaller number every year. And he could not explain it, and neither could anybody else he asked. The soil was just tired, people said. That was the word everybody used. Tired. Tidewater Shellfish opened its shucking house in 2007, 800 yards up the road, on the tidal creek. 60 jobs in a county that needed 600. Nobody was going to say a word against them, and Walt Prine did not either. Not really. Because half the people working there sat 2 pews behind him on Sunday. And here is the thing about shucking oysters. An oyster is mostly shell. Something like 85% of the landed weight of an oyster is the shell. And the shell has nothing anybody wants in it. So a plant that processes oysters produces an enormous, relentless river of shell. Hundreds of tons a year. Heavy, sharp, useless. At first it stinks. Fresh shell carries scraps of tissue. And for the first few weeks, a green pile of shell will turn your stomach from 200 yards downwind. Then the rain gets at it, and the sun, and the bacteria, And after a few months, it goes quiet and clean and white. And then it just sits there, forever, because oyster shell does not rot. So what does a shucking house do with it? The same thing every operation in this story does. The cheapest available thing. They asked Walt Prine if they could put some at the head of his farm road, just temporarily, while they sorted out a better arrangement. Walt said sure, because that is what you say when your neighbors are new and they ask politely. 9 years later he was still saying stop, and they were still saying next month. Now, I want you to pay attention to this next part, because there is a number in it, and the number is the whole ending of this story. In the spring of 2015, Walt got fed up enough to price out hauling the pile off himself. He called a man named Denny Kubiak, who ran 2 dump trucks out of the next county. Denny came out, looked at the mountain, and laughed. He explained that the trucking was not the expensive part. The expensive part was the other end. The county landfill charged $58 a ton to accept commercial waste, and shell is heavy. Denny figured the pile at somewhere north of 900 tons, $52,000, to throw away a pile of garbage that was not his. And then Denny Kubiak said the second thing that would matter. He said, "That's why they're putting it here, Walt. This is free." There it was again. The second time, somebody handed Walt Prine the answer, sideways, inside a piece of bad news. The cannery was not dumping on him out of laziness. They were dumping on him because the alternative cost $52,000 a loadout, every year, forever. Walt Prine drove home and did not think about that number again for 2 years. The summer of 2017 was the driest anybody could remember. By the second week of August, his home field looked like a hospital ward. Soybeans stunted and pale, leaves curling up, pods thin. He walked it on a Sunday afternoon, knowing he was looking at the worst year of his life. And then he came over the rise near the road, and there was a stripe, a band of soybeans about 40 feet wide, running downhill from the head of the farm road, straight through the middle of the dead field. And the beans in that stripe were dark green, knee-high taller, heavy with pods, in the middle of a drought. Walt Prine stood at the edge of it for a long time. He decided it was a wet spot, some seep, some old drainage, something running underground. That was the only thing that made sense, and it made enough sense that he was able to stop thinking about it. Except he could not stop thinking about it, because it was August, and it had not rained in 5 weeks, and there is no such thing as a wet spot in a 5-week drought. He walked back up the stripe, 40 feet wide, dead straight, narrowing slightly as it climbed, and at the top of it was the White Mountain. 9 years of rain had been falling on 900 tons of oyster shell and running downhill through his field. Now, before I tell you what he found when he finally got the dirt tested, do me one favor. Hit subscribe. I put a new story up every day. And this is the exact moment a man stops being a victim in his own story. Because what the lab sent back did not just explain the stripe, it explained 30 years. He mailed 2 soil samples to the state lab, one from the stripe, one from 20 yards outside it, $11 each. The report came back 9 days later, and the number that mattered was one Walt Prine had seen on 100 soil reports, over 40 years of farming, and had never once actually looked at. The pH. Outside the stripe, 5.1. Inside the stripe, 6.4. Here is what that means, and it is the reason this whole story exists. Soil pH does not feed a plant. It decides whether a plant can eat. When soil goes acidic, and the sandy coastal plain of Virginia goes acidic on its own, a little more every year, from rain and from the nitrogen fertilizer you put down to fix it. The phosphorus in that soil chemically binds up with iron and aluminum. It is still there. The lab can still measure it. The plant simply cannot get at it. At a pH of 5.1, better than half the phosphorus in that ground, is locked in a form no root can take up. Walt Prine had spent 30 years buying more and more fertilizer and spreading it on ground that was chemically incapable of handing it to his crop. He had not been farming tired soil. He had been feeding a locked box, and the thing that unlocks it, the thing every farmer in that county trucked in by the ton, every few years, from a quarry 40 miles inland, at real money per ton plus freight, is agricultural lime, which is crushed limestone, which is calcium carbonate, which is exactly, chemically, to within a couple of percent, what an oyster shell is. Walt Prine had been paying to haul in the same compound that tidewater shellfish was paying nothing to dump on his road, and a man had stood in his driveway 6 years earlier and told him so. It's calcium. It's the most harmless thing in the world. If that just landed on you the way it landed on him, tell me in the comments. Has anybody ever handed you the answer to your own problem while they were busy insulting you? I read every one of these, and some of them turn into the next story on this channel. Because Walt still had one problem, and it was a real one. Whole shells do not work. You cannot spread oyster shells on a field and raise your pH. Calcium carbonate only reacts with soil acid at its surface, so the finer you grind it, the faster and more completely it works. A whole shell sitting on the ground will do essentially nothing for decades. The reason that stripe existed at all was 9 years of rain, slowly abrading the bottom of a 900-ton pile, so Walt needed to crush it, which meant a machine. He found a used hammer mill at an equipment auction outside Petersburg in November of 2017 and paid $4,100 for it. Then he spent the winter in the shop rebuilding it because it did not run, which is why it was $4,100. It ran in March. He crushed and spread 11 tons on the home field that spring. That fall, the home field made 51 bushels an acre, his father's number. For the first time since 1981, he told 2 neighbors over coffee. He was not trying to start a business. He was telling them the way you tell somebody about a good used truck. By August, 11 farms in that county had asked him for shell. He priced it at half what the quarry charged delivered, and he still cleared more per ton than he had ever made on a bushel of anything. He hired Denny Kubiak, the man who had quoted him the $58 landfill rate, to run the trucks. And then his neighbor's wife asked him for a 5-gallon bucket for her chickens. Walt did not know why. She explained it to him in his own driveway. A laying hen puts nearly her entire calcium reserve into an eggshell every single day. Without supplemental calcium, she pulls it out of her own skeleton, her shells go thin, and she stops laying. Every backyard chicken keeper in America buys crushed oyster shell in a bag from the feed store. It is the standard product. It has been the standard product for 100 years. Walt Prine drove into town that afternoon and looked at the shelf. A 2-pound bag, $8 and change, crushed oyster shell. He was standing on 900 tons of it. By the summer of 2019, he had a screener, a bagging line in the old equipment shed, and a label. Chesapeake Shell Company, 16 feed stores across 3 counties. And in September of 2019, a white pickup came up Walt Prine's drive. They had heard. In a county of 900 people, of course they had heard. The man from Tidewater was polite. He explained that the company had been reviewing its byproduct stream and that going forward, the shell would be handled as a company asset. They were exploring commercial applications of their own. The deliveries would stop, and the material presently at the head of the farm road would be recovered and returned to plant inventory. Walt Prine listened to the whole thing. Then he told the man he would think about it, and he watched the truck go back down the drive. And the next morning he drove into town and bought a steel farm gate and 4 bags of concrete. He set it at the head of the road, across the entrance, with a chain and a padlock on it, and when the Tidewater truck came on Thursday, it could not get in. It could not get in the following Thursday either. Now Tidewater Shellfish had a problem. And it was the exact problem Denny Kubiak had described in Walt Prine's driveway 4 years earlier. They were producing better than 200 tons of shell a year. Their free disposal site was now behind a locked gate. The county landfill charged $58 a ton for commercial waste, which put them at better than $11,000 a year, every year, forever. And their state discharge permit required them to document where every ton of it went. They came back in November, and this time they were not there to reclaim anything. They were there to ask him to take it. Walt Prine charged them $22 a ton. They said yes before he finished the sentence. Because 22 is a very good number when the alternative is 58. So Tidewater Shellfish began paying Walt Prine to deliver, to his gate, on a schedule, the raw material for a business that he then sold at a profit. They paid him to receive it, and he got paid again when it left. If your jaw is on the floor, comment 22 a ton and let me know. That is the exact moment 9 years of getting dumped on turned into a supply contract. Now stay with me, because the best part of this story is not the money. By 2021, Chesapeake Shell Company was moving 1,400 tons a year and had contracts with 2 more shucking houses down the coast. But the thing that actually happened in that county was quieter than that. Walt started running free soil tests. He would pull samples off a neighbor's field, mail them in himself, and bring the report back out and sit at the kitchen table and go through it line by line, the way nobody had ever done for him. Because every one of those farms had the same problem, same coastal plain, same acid, same locked box, same 30 years of quietly declining yields that everybody had agreed to call tired soil. By 2023, he had put shell on better than 40 farms in 3 counties. The county extension agent ran the numbers that year and found that average soybean yield across that district had come up more than 9 bushels an acre since 2018. 9 bushels an acre, across 3 counties, out of a pile of garbage that had been sitting on one man's road for 9 years. And his son came home in 2022. Not because Walt asked him, because there was finally something there worth coming home to. There is a single whole oyster shell sitting on the windowsill above Walt Prine's kitchen sink. Not crushed, not bagged, just one shell, gray and rough on the outside, smooth pearl on the inside, picked off the top of the pile the morning after he read the soil report. It is the least valuable object in the entire operation. One shell will not do anything for anybody, and it is the only one he kept. Here is what I want you to take from this. Nobody ever hid anything from Walt Prine. The plant manager told him it was calcium, told him to his face, in his own driveway, as an insult, 6 years before he understood it. Denny Kubiak told him the landfill charged $58 a ton, and that number was the entire business model, sitting in the middle of a conversation about a quote he could not afford. Every soil report Walt had filed in a drawer for 40 years had the pH printed right on it. He was not missing information. He was drowning in information. What he was missing was the belief that anything on that pile could be worth anything to anybody. And once you believe a thing is garbage, you can look straight at the evidence and not see it. For 9 years, the stripe in the field is the only reason this story exists. Not because it told him something new. Because it was the one piece of evidence he could not explain away, standing in a dead field in a drought, looking at 40 feet of green. So go look at your fence line, go look at your road, look at the thing on your place that everybody has already agreed is worthless. And then ask who agreed to that, and when, and whether anybody ever actually checked. Because somebody has probably already told you exactly what it is. They were probably not even trying to help you. So tell me down in the comments, what is the pile on your place that everybody calls worthless? I read every single one, and some of them become the next story on this channel. And if you made it this far, you already know what to do. Subscribe. There is a new one every day. Tomorrow's is about a woman who paid $200 for a field nobody could farm, and then the airport needed every acre of it. You are going to want to be here for that one.